Emotional algebra, where the heart meets the math. What is integral is derivative as you figure out your path. Power plus emotions equals more than you can see. Listening to the wisdom of our host, Dr. E. Emotional Algebra with Dr. E.
Welcome to Emotional Algebra with Dr. E. Emotional Algebra is a podcast that helps listeners to understand the subtle calculations people make every day in their relationships with others. It's a podcast to help us all become better people through understanding the different variables that drive our behaviors. I'm your co-host, Andrew Tavani.
And I'm Dr. E.
Dr. E, it's good to see you. The last time we spoke for an episode, we left people on a bit of a cliffhanger.
Yes, we did. Yes, we did. We had had the winner of our Super Bowl, SOUPER. Also, I noticed when I had to do the transcript for the episode as it came out, I had to make sure everyone was spelled SOUP, so I might not have gotten in trouble for any potential copyright or trademark infringement. So they were all spelled SOUPER bold, just to be clear for the trademark cops out there.
True, but, and frankly, Dr. A, you might want to trademark that yourself, right? So no one else can use that.
I'll just share, I'll
share that with the universe.
The creativity. Yeah.
Very nice of
you. If
you.
Somebody else trademarks it, though, I'm not going to feel very happy about
it. That's why you got to just go ahead and do it. You don't have to enforce that trademark, just have it.
Yeah, that's true. So at least have the rights to use it, right?
Right.
So yes, as we talked about, I couldn't remember the winner. The winner was a drumroll, a red curry wonton soup.
Wow, red curry wontons. That sounds like a little bit of a fusion, perhaps. Maybe an Indian with Asian. Indian with wonton is what? Chinese or Japanese?
Japanese.
Japanese.
Yeah. So could be definitely an Asian fusion.
Now, did you have this? Did you have the soup?
I did.
Yeah.
I do remember it. It was good.
Now, do you want to divulge your vote, or
I was so busy. I was so busy, I didn't have time to vote.
But we've got an episode today.
Absolutely.
That is planned, and so we should get to it. What an interesting topic we have here, Dr. E. It looks like we're going back, and I've only glanced at it, so I haven't really gone deeply into this, but it looks like I'm going to have to maybe draw on my high school physics, what I remember in my high school physics class.
Yeah, well, we've touched on this. I've teased this episode for some time, all the way going back to the self-development stuff, because it's kind of it's an expansion on the concept of self-development to really take it to a point to explain a little deeper. I know often people feel a little intimidated by the word physics, and I don't want people to feel intimidated by that, because it's really simple. It's pretty simple stuff. So that's some of the just to give a teaser to that.
Yeah, and as you often do, you brought some visuals to help people understand these concepts, because I think people are going to find that these are some interesting concepts applied to things that maybe they haven't thought of before. So we'll take a look at that, and I think anyone who's just listening, you're forewarned. I would move to the video. You may want to see this.
Yep. Okay, so
let's jump into it.
We're going to start off with this concept, what I call quantum emotions, reconsideration of physics. And I think the way that I always ask people to look at emotions as energy. They kind of have a sense of energy. There's some people, who walk into rooms and they can feel the energy of the situation. They can feel if people feel angry. They can just tell when people feel sad and might be hiding that. So I always say we just want to look at things as really potentially take from the concept of energy. Does our science look at it that way? Not necessarily yet. And science, I always say, science is always evolving. And that's what we have to look at, is the science of psychology, the science of psychiatry. Many of our fields and medical fields are still evolving. So we want to be careful not to stop the bus and say we've reached truth. So as we begin, Simple laws of physics that I want people to keep in mind as we go through this, that I tie to this. All right, the law of conservation of mass basically says that energy can never be created or destroyed; it only changes forms. That's critical, because as we look at this idea of what contributes to how we become, how we behave, how we feel, and how we express that, to me, is really affected by that idea of energy can never be created or destroyed. Next one is Newton's first law of motion. An object placed in motion remains in motion until acted upon by an equal and opposite force. All right. So once
Dr.
we
A.
place it,
Yeah.
yes,
I'm getting I'm recalling the word inertia. Is that what we're talking about here?
it is. Yeah, it is.
Mm.
Good job. Good job.
Thank you.
So this basically says, and I added the equal and opposite force to it because if you put an object, let's say we have a meteorite or going through space, and it hits another meteorite coming at it. Well, it's not going to stop that if it's not matched in the equal and opposite direction. So if two objects come together equal and opposite force, they should just kind of hit, and they might possibly bounce off each other. But the idea is that they should hit and then meet there. And then that force should be put into inaction. All right. So if one hits at a angle, it's going to send one off in one angle and one off in another angle. And you haven't necessarily returned it to its resting state. So that's what we want to look at, is this idea of absorption of energy, neutralizing that energy through the equal and opposite reaction or equal and opposite force. So next one we're coming into every action's the equal and opposite reaction. So y'all might be wondering, how does this tie into emotions? Well, once we experience an experience, and we'll get into it, can you really destroy that experience? How many people want to just forget things that feel bad and wrong and weak? How many people think that if I feel something, that feeling should just dissipate and go away? And then a month, a year, decades later, something happens. And then all of a sudden it's like, oh, I feel it. So where has it been? And then the third one, every action has an equal and opposite reaction. In some ways, we could say that could come down to karma. If we do something, we kind of, something's going to happen to not to punish us, but I always say things happen to teach us. That if we put something in action, we have to return that. We have to experience that in kind. I'm not a thinker that things have to happen tenfold. If you put something out, it's going to happen to you tenfold. I think that becomes more of a fear-based and or a reward-based concept that, oh my gosh, I've done something bad, I have to pay it back 10 times, or I've done something good for somebody, then I'm going to get 10 times the reward. I'm kind of a little cautious of that idea.
But Dr. E, are you saying that karma is real? Because I know there's a debate about that.
To me, it's energy. It's something that we have to look at as a concept. That is it possible? Yes. I mean, again, I'm very careful to try to remain scientific in my approach. So if I want to say that karma doesn't exist, then from my alternative hypothesis, I have to say that it does exist. So, or the null hypothesis says it does exist until I prove that absolutely it doesn't exist. So I have to always entertain the opposite to be true. Even if I do say that karma does exist, I have to hold on to the idea that it doesn't.
Right.
And theories we want to say we prove, but still not many theories are proved to 100% beyond the shadow of a doubt, so to speak. So we want to look at that idea that these are things that we're entertaining. These are things that we're looking at and considering, that as we understand the universe, as we make potentially some of these connections that we're talking about and extend physics concepts to emotions, then it's a theory. And it's a theory that I see play out in my work time and time and time again. Otherwise, I wouldn't propagate it, because I don't want to put stuff out there that I feel is just inaccurate. So I've seen these theories and I've tied them to, actually years ago, when I was looking at, the two core emotions that of love, fear, and pain, or love, and I looked at love and fear at that time. I read A Brief History of Time by Stephen Hawking, and I saw there were three forces in the universe: light energy, and dark matter. And we'll touch on that in a little bit. And I thought, yeah, there does seem to be a third. Love and fear didn't seem to make as much sense. And that's then when I came up with that concept of pain as being that third core emotion. And it ties to, again, the three emotions tied to the three forces in that universe: light energy, dark matter. And like I said, we'll get into that in a little bit. But so in that, is it a theory that simplifies things? Yes. And that's the whole tenet of Occam's razor. That idea of Occam's razor said if you have two theories that explain the same thing, often you want to consider the simpler one, because that one has the ability to make that much more sense. So am I saying there's not a more complex theory? No, but I'm saying this one works. It explains a lot. I use it a lot with people to help them understand these pieces. Because remember, I see a lot of people with a lot of different skills and gifts and experiences. So people who are into science, I might go into the quantum physics stuff with. Even young kids in school, as they're getting into possibly taking physics courses, or they're in science courses and stuff. I'll get into these issues. Even people who want to talk about more spiritual things, I might talk about the physics things, because I believe that spirituality and science marry together very well, because the universe had to follow the laws, if we want to go there, to what any creator would say. And if there is no creator, then there still are the physics and laws of physics in the universe that tie it all together. So I try to look at how can I cover as many boxes as possible in ways that fit and make sense, so that we can really help people to understand what,
Yeah.
why we're here in the world.
Karma, Dr. E, seems like one of those things that may be very, very difficult, if not impossible, to prove scientifically. But I think it's one of those things that a lot of people may say feels real.
Yeah, the biggest thing I get back to in that discussion of karma is, I say it's not about punishment. Too many people go to karma and like, you're going to get punished. I just see it as learning. It's a leveling. You want to call it a leveling of the scales, you can do that. But I say it's an opportunity for us to learn what it might have felt like to be on the other side of it. And that's what we have to learn. And even, from the standpoint of, as we give rewards, it doesn't mean we're going to get punished for that. And as when we give rewards, it doesn't mean we're going to see that. So a lot of people who get tied into that idea of karma think that, well, I want to see it pay off, or there's been no justice. And that idea, to me, it doesn't help either, because we're missing, to me, the idea that if there is karma, it's probably not us that's going to define when the karma is repaid.
Right.
So we want to look at our sense of power and control to redefine or define when karma should be repaid. And that's where I think there's faith that comes into play there. Remember that span between fear and truth, that what I say faith is in that span. Have faith that we all have to learn the lessons of life, the lessons of emotion, the lessons of our existence. And in that, I just say it's our journey back to really understanding what love truly is, often through what it isn't.
Interesting, Dr. E. I was told by John Lennon that instant karma is going to get you. So I think,
Yeah, that's a nice lyric in a song, or
yes. Okay,
But
let's
yeah,
move back to the visual
sure.
here. Yeah.
All right. So consider emotions as frequencies. So what I mean by that is every emotion is a different frequency. And so, like, this might be one emotion, this might be another emotion, and this might be a third emotion. And we'll get into those sounds that they're making and how that might affect the way we perceive the emotions. But in that idea, if we're looking at emotions as frequencies, you can see them like a color or a sound. Like I said, you can't paint or create a musical masterpiece or a painting, a masterpiece with one color. You could paint it, and you could make that song just by, that song's not very interesting. Or that
Right.
painting, you could say it's a white painting, you could say, what is the joke as a kid? It's a flea in a snowstorm, but, the idea is that you're not going to create the variability and the beauty of life's experiences in a symphony, in a song, in a painting, in a whole, gallery of paintings, in a museum, with just one color. So that's the way I want people to look at emotions. Again, it's not about emotions as being good or bad or right or wrong or strong or weak, as we've talked about so many times. The idea is that then there would be some bad notes and there would be some good notes. There would be some right notes and some wrong notes, or colors in a painting. And if we've all seen all the paintings, they have many have almost many colors in it, and many paintings will have different colors in it. And it's not that one painting is defined as better or worse than the other. Just like songs might be written in different keys, so those
Right.
songs might not be the right song in the key that the song is written in, but then you have a dissonance of a key that resolves. Like some songs will end with a little dissonance on a chord, a note that doesn't quite fit in the chord, and then it resolves, and it's almost like an when you
Yeah.
have that chord that resolves into, from a minor to a major, or
Yes.
from a note that's a little flat to being in key.
That's
So
what I was gonna say. The minor and major chords. Those minor chords sound a little darker, a little bit. I guess when songs have or are sad, like the ballads often are written with minor chords in them, or maybe even based on a minor chord.
yeah, and then sometimes those songs will resolve into the major chords, or they'll mix the minor and majors into
Yeah.
the same song. So that's where it's about, again, reframing the way that we look at this concept of emotions from what was very limited and or not at all. Remember, we talked about throughout these episodes that we don't really have emotion school. And just like last week's episode on emotional specificity, how many people really looked at failures just saying, yeah, it's time to learn. Guilt, oh, you might have done something to somebody else you want to fix. Anger, it's trying to protect you. So these are the things that we want to continue to remember to look at, is taking a different perspective on this. So the other thing is, how many emotions are in action at any one time. So if we have an experience as a kid, and in that experience, and we're going to get to that explain it in a little more in a little bit. And in that experience, we experience sadness, and we experience maybe fear, and we experience betrayal. Remember that idea of, once an object is placed in motion, it remains in motion until acted upon by the equal and opposite force. So if I hit these chimes in a non-gravitational space, in other words, I was out in space and I hit this chime and I put it in motion, how long would it stay ringing and in action?
From what I remember of my physics classes in high school, I would say forever. Right? It wouldn't stop.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. And that's what I look at. Our emotions are almost put into motion in a non-gravitational space within us, because it's a concept, it's an energy. And to me, it exists in this non-gravitational space of our, you want to call it our subconscious or conscious or whatever, but it's in there. And to me, that issue, if it comes, no matter if it potentially feels good or bad or right or wrong, it may stay in motion forever. And then how is an emotion that we determine might feel like a pain-based emotion and or fear-based emotion going to affect our perception, if this is pain and fear, from hearing that love-based emotion? So now what we're talking about is what happens when shame, guilt, inadequacy, failure, helpless, hopeless, misunderstood, confused, overwhelmed, abandoned, rejected, neglected, violated. What happens when all those emotions are placed in motion? And how long do they stay ringing? Well, we might do things to shift the way we perceive that emotion, but it doesn't mean it ever stops its motion. So that's what I find is interesting when you look at the word emotion, and I talk about this idea and the concept of physics and motion. It's just, to me, a unique, coincidence that we have one word off emotion from motion. Take it for what you want.
Yeah, that is interesting. You've brought that up before on this podcast, and I think
Yeah.
interesting thing for people to keep in mind. Okay.
Yeah. Yeah. So what is emotional resonance? Emotional resonance is the idea that when I ping this sound, everything in this room, in your room where you're hearing this, in your to your ear, to your middle ear, the what malleus, incus, and stapes, your anvil, hammer, and stirrup, that vibrates with your eardrum, moves it to your cochlea. Your cochlea then on that the bone shakes in your cochlea, which then creates these frequencies in your cochlea that then it's repeating that frequency in all these places because it resonates, it moves, it vibrates off of it. Then it hits that little cilia, that little hair cell in your ear that then registers to your brain that sound. All right. So anything else, like I said, in this room that vibrates with this might start to vibrate. We can't necessarily hear it, but it does. All right. So if this is vibrating, what might it do to something that's already vibrating with that frequency? It might increase the amplitude of that waveform, make that volume a little louder, perceptible or not.
Right.
So, any
And
questions?
I was going to say, I suppose that you have two sound waves. I guess it's kind of almost what you're saying here, right? And then another could come in, and then another, and it could be a whole, salad bowl
Right.
of emotions or sounds or emotions, right? That's what you're saying.
Well, yeah, because even this and this and this are harmonics.
Yeah.
They're in harmony. So even when I ping one, it might increase the resonance of the harmonic of that sound. So I used to play my sax a lot. And one thing that I do to work on my embouchure and to work on the technique of playing is I'd work to relax my jaw to create the harmonic with the reed, the vibration, shift the vibration of that to then play the harmonic of the note that I was playing. And even guitar players will know what I mean by harmonics. When you tap the note that you're playing, you can then play the harmonics. So it's really important to understand harmonics because every note has its harmonics. So we want to look at, are there harmonics? Like, are guilt and shame, as I call them, brothers? Do they exist as harmonics? When I talk about hopelessness and helplessness and their relationship, they might be a little further apart on the keyboard of emotion, whereas they still might be harmonics of each other. So that's what I want us to look at, is the relationship between emotions, almost from the standpoints of notes, or even if we want to look at the color wheel, we can go to the color wheel and what's called the circle of fifths and look at those things too in the same way of emotion. So if anybody wants to learn more about the connection of the circle of fifths, John Coltrane talked about the circle of fifths, and there's some videos on that, and that really tying back to a lot of really interesting ideas he had about the universe and kind of this pattern, that these patterns that follow themselves in the universe. And I got to thank a buddy of mine, Billy Craig, who actually contacted me about the podcast, who introduced me to the circle of fifths, because we got into some of these discussions. He's like, oh, you got to check this out. So I owe this edition to him and the feedback that he gave me. So think about emotional resonance when you're experiencing something, because as I say, usually one emotion doesn't happen at a time. Usually in any one experience, we're having multiple emotions, but because we're not taught that emotional specificity, we often can't tease out what those emotions are. So what we're going to go back to now is we're going to go back to our self-development slide and how that worked. And we're going to talk about it now in terms of kind of this idea of quantum emotions. So remember, we have our conscious mind. Our conscious mind's job is to exist and survive, and beyond that, thrive and succeed. So it is present oriented. And then as we have experiences in life, we have these different experiences that come with at least one emotion. Some of them, those emotions might not go very well together. Absolutely. But some of them do resonate with each other, like failure and stupid would resonate with each other. Even you could say guilt and shame may resonate with failure and stupid, because usually when we experience one, we experience many of those at the same time. So as we have these different emotional experiences here, then what happens? Well, you can see that each of them has like their own bubble. So remember I said that energy can never be created or destroyed, it only changes form. So just by putting these little bubbles in here, does this mean that the same volume of energy that this person came to their life with, does that mean that that changed? Did we add anything to that person by creating these bubbles of experience?
I think we have. I think, right?
Well, if I take a pool of water and I take a bunch of different containers and I take that container and I put it in a jar, and I have different size jars, I have Tupperware containers, I have little vials, and I put a little piece of food coloring in that for maybe the emotions, that each one for a different emotion, and I throw that in that pool, and it's back in the pool. Just the only thing that separates it is that container. Other than the container, did I add anything to the volume of water in that pool?
There's water in those jars.
Now
Then
the
yes.
water that was in the pool, so I scooped up water from the
Oh,
pool
then
and
well,
I
yes.
put it in
I
the
mean,
jar.
the food coloring. I think if we're talking about this from a physics perspective, I don't know, Doctor A.
Well,
You're
it's
the doctor.
minimal.
You tell me.
Well, it's minimum. It could be powder, I could, but the goal is
Yeah.
to separate those issues to help see the distinct difference between that the water in the pool and the water in the jar, and to see that it has meaning. The color defines the meaning of the experience. The color
Right.
defines the emotion. So we all have all the same emotions. It's just when they're activated. So even if this is a person and they could just came to this world, this isn't making any noise, right?
Right.
Yet it has the potential to make noise. And when life acts upon that object, it puts that object in motion. When life acts upon emotion, that to me, we come here and those emotions are all in their inert resting state, and we act upon those emotions, we put those emotions in motion. So with each of these experiences that I'm denoting in that slide, all with the different colors, they denote a different experience, and then that different color denotes potentially the emotions, or maybe whatever it is, it denotes the uniqueness of that. And then we go back to the bigger circles that have the smaller circles inside. To me, those denote the creation of different belief systems, as we talked about before. That belief systems are comprised of multiple experiences with common emotions, potentially common people, common outcome, common experiences. They have things in common. And if I could easily do it with PowerPoint, or I'd overlap some of those circles to show that you can have belief systems and attitude systems that share some of the same experiences, not all the same experiences, but some of those same experiences. And the idea of when we encapsulate those, that's where often we've tried to define those experiences as good or bad, or right or wrong, or strong or weak, as helping us win or lose. And remember, that's when we're going to take the experiences that feel bad and or wrong and or weak, and we're going to bury them somewhere. We're going to try to deny that those experiences exist. So what we want to remember is that our conscious mind builds a barrier, whether it's at birth or after, but we build stronger and stronger barriers between that and our unconscious. So
Right.
our unconscious,
Yeah. So
go ahead.
most of this is not even. Most people aren't even feeling it on a. They're not. Are they feeling it, or they're not feeling it because they're not conscious of it, or some.
It depends on the person, and people who feel things are often, I think, seen as weaker. Well, you're more emotional. And often I'll tell people, it's not that you're more emotional. You're just more aware. Is that a bad thing that you're aware of your emotions? No. But when people get into overwhelm and they don't know what to do with it, and they don't remember the purpose of overwhelm is to back up. Remember, don't eat the elephant one bite at a time. Break it down into all the parts and pieces, and understand the emotions that are going to come with overwhelmed: failure, stupid, maybe guilt, shame, confused, doubt, helpless, hopeless. These are all emotions that might come with that feeling of overwhelmed. Now, the other issue becomes, well, as our conscious mind learns to become more logic based, it wants to eliminate or diminish the number of emotions that we might feel. So I recently posted the Logic Felt Within poem and we talked about that in one of the previous episodes, right?
Right.
And in that poem, it was all about the battle kind of that began between logic and all the emotions. And in the end, logic realized, oh, I need you guys. And you didn't deserve to be treated the way you're treated. And the emotions had to understand that, wait, we really need to work with logic. And weren't seeing the problems we were creating for that. So in the long run, again, this becomes about us looking and changing our perceptions about how we see these concepts in within ourselves and how we see them and relate them to physics and quantum physics.
Now, just to jump in, Dr. E,
Mhm.
building on what we saw in some of the previous slides and just looking at the concepts of physics, the logic, it can't do that, right? You can't make these emotions go away. If they're like matter, right? They are there. They can only change form, I guess. Is that right? They
Right.
can't be destroyed or
Well,
yeah.
and even if let's say you look at that idea of Armageddon, a movie, and you see this big asteroid coming towards the Earth, and you wanna destroy that asteroid. They couldn't destroy it. They blew it up. Did it destroy the asteroid? No, it just broke that asteroid into thousands and thousands and thousands of pieces that chunks were bigger than others and things. So you didn't destroy it. You shifted its form. You shifted the distribution of mass. And that's the same thing to me we do with our emotions. Emotions is we shift the distribution of mass. Now, the way I would define back, if we go back a few to the beginning, is this circle here is the energy that we come to the world with, that we can do anything in our life with. But then again, as I said, as we experience emotions and we don't understand those emotions, all we do is we feel things in response to those emotions, and we feel things in response to our outside world. Then the way we view those emotions is going to affect the way we use that energy. If we call it bad and wrong and weak, then it becomes oppositional. Then we want to destroy it, but we can't. So that's why as we move forward and we get to this idea of defenses, our defenses insulate. And remember that idea of every action has an equal and opposite reaction. So I didn't lay this out in the slide, but sometimes what I'll talk about on the board is I'll go to, and let's say we come to this world with 1,000 energy units to live our life out. And in my experience in life, I've had 200 energy units of activated sadness. That's somewhere in my end. Let's say all these little red circles here are all related to sadness, and there's 200 energy units that I've got devoted to sadness. And sadness wants to be heard. Sadness is expressed. Sadness is the compilation of all the experiences over time, from early life to present life, that resulted in a resonance of that emotion of sadness. So what does that mean? Well, when I have a life event, any life event that resonates with sadness pings
Hmm.
those experiences of sadness inside. Therefore, what we have there is that idea of what we call an affect bridge, a connection to those emotions over time. So if I want to defend and keep myself from consciously feeling that sadness, how many energy units do I have to put towards defending myself from hearing that sadness?
I would think 200.
Right. So that's the every action has an equal and opposite reaction. Now, let's say I also have feelings of failure, and I've got 100 units into experiences of failure. And with failure, I know I'm going to experience usually shame at least, if not guilt, and have 100 more units of that. Now
You
I'm
might
up
feel
to four.
some you might feel some sadness too, right?
Right, because when we feel guilt, remember, sadness is the emotional expression of pain. And failure and guilt and shame are all pain-based emotions. So they're going to resonate with sadness, or be in that wheelhouse, if we want to say, of sadness. So then what's going to happen is now I've got 400 energy units in sadness specifically, and now failure plus shame. Now, how many units do I have to devote towards defending myself from feeling those feelings and memories and experiences?
400.
400. Now I came with 1,000 energy units. I
Yeah.
only have 200 left to devote to my conscious life, to devote to moving forward. And we're just talking about 4 emotions here.
So are you saying most of your energy is kept is used deployed to sort of manage your subconscious or unconscious
I
emotions?
think for a number of people, yes.
Wow.
And why are they on, again, theoretically, what are the medications doing? They're shifting that neurochemistry to artificially affect our perception of emotions. What happens when those people go off those medications?
I don't
Everything
know what
comes back.
happened.
Often it comes back
Yeah.
because
Okay.
you've artificially shifted the perception of emotion neurochemically. Now, am I saying this is only what's happening? No, we have our genetics, we have our temperament, we all have our histories. These are things, though, that as I've worked with people and done their deeper work, I've had people who are able to totally get off their meds. Is
Hmm.
it for everybody? No. Does it mean that if you can't do it, that you failed? No. Are there other factors that go into it? Absolutely. So I'm not saying that this is the absolute theory of what's going to fix everything and everyone. I'm very careful not to do that. But I want to say that I have seen it happen multiple times as we take this approach to help people understand what's going on. Often what happens is we rob Peter to pay Paul. With our defenses, we might be defending the sadness, the failure, and the shame in one situation. All of a sudden, we have to shift those defenses to now defend fear and terror and panic. And what happens with people who might have post-traumatic stress where they have guilt and shame and failure because often they weren't able to save someone or prevent something from happening that felt traumatic, and then they can have fear and terror from those experiences that happen and feelings of helplessness that often underlie the anxiety side of the post-traumatic stress. So when we look at what happens with different issues that manifest as diagnoses and we break them down into the emotions and we start to understand this idea from limited defenses, and remember, not only am I defending from my conscious mind to my unconscious, I'm also defending from my conscious mind to the outside world. And that's then, I'm going to expend a lot of energy between me and the outside world so that supposedly I can't feel it on my inside world. As you can see in that diagram, though, our conscious mind might try to defend things off, but our unconscious mind, it's going to go right through to that. So that's the thing we got to understand is no matter how hard we try to defend, it still hits us and there's somewhere. And that's where I see a lot of adults who say, yeah, that didn't really bother me. That was fine. And I say, well, how did it affect your sleep? How did it affect your attitude? Have you felt a
That,
little more grumpy?
yeah, that's what I'm wondering. Are people consciously trying to defend themselves? I feel like a lot of people, maybe it's happening, but they're not aware of it.
I think it's a mix. Well, I think a lot of times people just don't know. I can't tell you how many times I've had people in the office where they really don't have an idea. And that's again why I go and ask, what age are you feeling? So that's where it's often helping them to see that and start to get the idea of what's happening and what they're doing, even though they want to deny that that whole process is happening. And it's very subtle. And it's kind of like for people who are into computer programming, remember those TSRs, the terminate, stay, resonant programs that are running in the background, and you're swapping RAM. Your RAM is always swapping in what it's using. So you have all these programs in there that are in the background, able to run on a click, and then you're basically divvying up how much RAM. And what happens when you get an overload and your computer glitches? Well, that's kind of the same thing that happens here, and then your computer locks up or it just runs out of RAM. So that's again another way to understand that. So in this, what I want people to understand from quantum physics is, how do we date the age of a star? Well, we date the age of the star as is when enough matter came together and elements came together, whatever they may be, through the forces of the bonds of those elements and then the gravitational draw of those elements, and they all came together to then form their own fuel source, and then they and then there was light for that star, and then that star became separate in its own mass, usually again in that circular form, because it's going to draw to its most simplest form, that gravity is going to pull things to more a circular form from a center point. That star is dated from that time. Our emotional experiences, to me, are dated from the times at which we took that energy and said, "No, either it's good or bad or right or wrong or strong or weak." We have plenty of memories that we call on that might be good memories. Those are also their own fragments. We just call them good and strong, and we often pit the strong against the weak. Remember that poem, "Leaving confusion to take the fall." But in that, the stuff that feels bad and wrong and weak, we can't destroy it, so that's where our defenses come in. And when life resonates with it, yes, it's gonna increase the amplitude of that, the noise of that experience. So when I'm asking people what age they feel, this is where that energy is fragmented from that time, whether it felt traumatic or not. It felt bad and or wrong and or weak enough to say, "I don't want you. I want to get rid of you. I can't, so I'm just going to cut you off." And then we're depleting our ability to use that energy in that experience for positive life experiences, because we've called it bad and wrong and weak. So that's where people get and feel more and more worn out. The more experiences that have where they feel depressed or feeling anxious or all the other emotions, are just it's the amplitude and volume of those emotions that they need to be heard. We want to hear them because then we
Dr.
understand them.
When you ask people the question, how old do they feel or how old do they think they are? What's sort of a common answer? Or do people think that they feel older generally or younger than they actually are? What's kind of the garden variety answer you hear from people?
The first answer is, "What are you talking about?" "I feel my age." And then I'll say, "Okay,
Mm.
just hang on a minute. Feel." "Yeah, I just feel my age." So there's resistance often to that idea. Then sometimes people say, "I feel old, I feel worn out." I said, "Okay, that's overwhelmed. Now go back to the feeling that you feel and feel if there's a memory with that." And then a lot of people, when they get quiet, in other words, they're quieting, they're kind of opening up the defenses a little bit. They're letting that emotion and or memory come through. And sometimes it's just a bunch of feelings, because if you see that affect bridge in the slide, they're connecting all of those experiences of sadness. So it's just the overwhelming feeling maybe of sadness and or failure and guilt and shame and or helplessness and terror and panic. So they're not really able at that point maybe to separate. And then that's why a lot of times I'll do the hypnotic work, because that helps people get back, and hopefully they're able to let the defenses down enough as I ask them to find whatever time, place, memory, emotion, experience, attitude, belief, perception, or event that then allows their subconscious to say, "Okay, here's something to look at. And here's another event to look at," or "Here are a string of events to look at that we tie together." But that's where it takes time to do this, because it's not something we've been taught to do. It's not something people typically want to do. It's not something they feel like they can easily just put away. And that's, to me, what a lot of people feel afraid to do, is they feel afraid to unpack this stuff, because then if they let it out, they feel afraid it will never get back in, because they recognize, consciously or unconsciously, it took a lot of energy to get those defenses in place to keep themselves from feeling that stuff.
Got it. Interesting.
And even what we want to remember is we have our cognitive defenses: rationalization, justification, minimization, denial, projective identification, those things like that are logic based. And then we have those emotional defenses: anger, rage, arrogance, flippancy, defiance, sarcasm, and hatred, and annoyed, irritated. So remember that those are some of those defenses that are acting also, and they don't want to lose their job. They don't want to let the conscious mind down, if we see it that way. And the conscious mind, remember, often seeks control. So that's what we want to remember, is the relationship between these concepts as if it's living energy. And that's kind of the idea, is almost to look at it as living energy.
Okay, so this episode is a really unique concept, and the conversation ran a little bit long. We got really deep into it. So we decided to break this episode into two parts.
Emotional